We have another question from Facebook from Julian with a specific sub-question for each of you. Professor Martinez, when working on an adaptation from a book or other media, what are typical constraints one may find when writing?
I would say the first one, whether it's either adapting or book, which I've been close to doing a couple times. I actually haven't done it yet, but I have written material based on true life experiences. So at least thinking about it from that perspective, like you have to consider how faithful you're staying to the quote unquote source material, while also making the sort of script, the story, its own thing. And so you also have to think about how do you retain the heart of the material away from what it originally was, because a lot of times people will be talking about films like, oh, it wasn't like the original book or blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, the book is a very particular thing on its own. And the film tends to exist as a very particular thing on its own. And they can exist sort of, simultaneously without sort of jeopardizing whatever the heart is of that. In the true story adaptations I've done, you can include everything. You absolutely can. Like I've worked with some of my MFA students who've tried taking memoirs they've written and then try to adapt those into a screenplay, and it almost always ends in like some kind of frustration on their behalf because they're so frustrated that they can't put everything that they want into the script. And like, I love film, I love cinema, but it's very limited in terms of how much you can say and do in terms of that scope. Especially if you're a newer writer. If you have some experience, you can definitely, you can do a lot. I mean, there's tons that you can do with it. But at least in terms of that adaptation, you can include everything. You have to think about, the split between dramatizing something and the truth of something. You have to do your research, whether that's just, a combination of news material, research material that you find on the web or through articles you find, in libraries or online or things like that, versus talking to actual people who lived through it, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of working sort of cogs that you have to kind of think about when adapting material. So
yeah, what you were saying about like people comparing them, and it seems like people forget often that they're two different mediums, and there's limitations to both.
Yeah, I mean, and just because a book adaptation into a film doesn't quite work in the same way that a book does, doesn't devalue the book in any way. Like, you can still read and love the book for what it is and for what it was, and still maybe criticize the film or love the film equally for different things that it does. So, yeah.